Imagine this. You're walking down a bustling city street, the kind lined with high-end boutiques, sleek office buildings, and restaurants where a single meal could cost more than some people's monthly grocery bill. The air hums with the rhythm of ambition, and every step you take feels like an echo of progress. But then you turn a corner and it feels like you've walked into a different world. The glitz and glamour vanish. In its place, there's a haunting stillness. Makeshift shelters cobbled together from tattered tarps and cardboard. A woman sits on the curb, clutching a tattered blanket, her face weathered by years of struggle. A child no older than 5 plays with a broken toy beside her. You can't help but wonder, how did we get here? This is the reality of homelessness in America's largest cities, a reality so jarring, so heart-wrenching, it forces you to ask uncomfortable questions. How can the same streets that cradle billion-dollar skyscrapers also shelter people without homes? How does a nation with such wealth, innovation, and opportunity leave millions behind? And why is it that women, especially, seem to bear the brunt of this crisis, vulnerable, exposed, and often invisible to the very society they help sustain? Today, we aren't just scratching the surface. We're diving deep into the unspoken truths, the stories that get buried beneath headlines, and the lives that go unnoticed in the shadows of prosperity. These are not just statistics or abstract concepts. These are real people with dreams once as vivid as yours, now fighting battles that many of us can't even begin to comprehend. What if the roles were reversed? What if tomorrow, everything you knew, your job, your home, your stability slipped through your fingers? Would you survive the relentless tide of rising rents, stagnant wages, and a system that seems designed to fail those who need it most? Would you find hope where there seems to be none? Or would you too be swallowed by the shadows? This isn't just a story about homelessness. It's a mirror held up to our society, reflecting the fragility of what we call progress. So as we embark on this journey through America's largest cities, brace yourself. The stories you're about to hear will challenge you, move you, and perhaps change the way you see the world and yourself. Let's begin. First up, let's talk about San Francisco. In the shadow of the Golden Gate Bridge lies a grim reality that tourists rarely see. The vibrant, postcard-perfect skyline of San Francisco obscures neighborhoods where despair feels palpable. These streets are filled with the sounds of footsteps hurriedly passing by, the distant hum of traffic, and the occasional clatter of someone scavenging through trash bins in search of their next meal. Consider Marcus, a once promising musician who now strums a battered guitar on the corner of Market Street. "I came here to make it big," he says, his voice tinged with regret. But the city's beauty hides how brutal it can be if you fall behind. Marcus's dreams were derailed by a series of evictions, a lost job, and an untreated injury that left him unable to perform. "San Francisco is the city that makes you believe anything is possible," he says. "But for people like me, it feels like everything is impossible." San Francisco's shelters are overwhelmed, offering little respite to the thousands who need a safe place to stay. With only a fraction of the required beds available, many are turned away nightly, forced to seek refuge in doorways, parks, or subway stations. Jane, a 42-year-old woman who fled domestic violence, shares her story of navigating the shelter system. "I waited in line for hours only to be told there was no room," she says. "I ended up sleeping on the steps of City Hall." Maria's voice quivers as she recounts the fear that accompanied her nights on the street. "Every shadow felt like a threat. I didn't sleep. I couldn't." The lack of safe spaces for women is particularly alarming. Many shelters are co-ed, leaving women vulnerable to harassment and violence even in supposed havens. "You're trading one danger for another," Maria says. "It's not a choice, it's survival." The tech boom that transformed San Francisco into a global innovation hub has also created a stark divide between the haves and have-nots. While million-dollar condos rise into the skyline, those without means are pushed further to the margins. Tech worker Greg Chen admits the disparity is difficult to reconcile. "I walk past tents on my way to work every day," he says. "I'm earning 6 figures, but I feel complicit in a system that leaves so many behind." Chen's employer recently offered to match his donations to local charities, but he feels the gesture falls short. "This isn't something you can solve with money alone," he says. "It's about rebuilding the social fabric." Moving on to Sacramento. Sacramento's homeless encampments, scattered along the American River Parkway, resemble small makeshift villages. Here, tents are patched together with tarps, old blankets, and anything else people can scavenge. These encampments are both a sanctuary and a target, frequently raided by authorities under the guise of cleanup operations. "I've lost everything 3 times, says Marisol, a 28-year-old woman who has lived in the parkway for over a year. "Each time the city sweeps through, they throw away our belongings, our clothes, our photos, everything." Marisol clutches a faded picture of her daughter, one of the few possessions she managed to save. "I keep this close. It's all I have left." Marisol's story is not unique. The parkway is home to dozens of single mothers who, like her, struggle to provide for their children under impossible circumstances. "We share food, clothes, whatever we can," she says, "but it's never enough." One of the most heartbreaking aspects of Sacramento's homelessness crisis is the number of children affected. Schools in the area report a significant increase in students classified as homeless. Teachers like Mrs. Kim at Washington Elementary describe the challenges these children face. "They come to school hungry, tired, and anxious," she says. "How can they focus on learning when they're worried about where they'll sleep tonight?" Sacramento's housing policies have failed to keep pace with its growing population. The city's focus on attracting tech startups and luxury developments has left low-income residents behind. "We're building for people who don't live here yet," says local activist Diego Torres. Meanwhile, the people who built this city are being pushed out. The Housing Choice Voucher Program, commonly known as Section 8, has a wait list so long it's essentially closed. "I applied 3 years ago," Marisol says. "I'm still waiting." Without access to affordable housing, families like hers are forced to navigate a cycle of instability that feels inescapable. Now, Phoenix. Phoenix's summers are unforgiving, with temperatures regularly exceeding 115 degrees Fahrenheit. For those without shelter, the heat is not just uncomfortable, it's deadly. Emergency cooling centers offer temporary relief, but they're often overcrowded and inaccessible to those who need them most. David, a 63-year-old man with diabetes, describes the struggle to survive the summer heat. "I carry water everywhere," he says, showing the empty plastic bottles he keeps strapped to his backpack. "But it's never enough. The heat takes everything out of you, your strength, your hope." David's feet are swollen and blistered, a result of walking barefoot on the scalding asphalt after his shoes were stolen. "You don't think about shoes until you don't have them," he says with a weary smile. Phoenix is a city of rapid growth with sprawling suburbs and gleaming office buildings. Yet this prosperity exists alongside extreme poverty. Drive down any major road and you'll see homeless individuals seeking shade under bus stops or bridges, their belongings piled into shopping carts. "The city looks like it's booming," says Alina, a 35-year-old social worker. "But for every new development, there's an eviction notice." Elena spends her days helping families navigate Phoenix's limited social services. "We're playing catch up," she says. "The demand far outweighs the resources." Phoenix's opioid epidemic has devastated communities, pushing many into homelessness. Mike, a 29-year-old former construction worker, shares his battle with addiction. "It started with painkillers after an injury," he says. "I never thought I'd end up here." Mike's voice cracks as he describes losing contact with his family. "They don't know where I am. I don't even know where I am half the time." Mike recently began attending meetings through a local nonprofit, but the road to recovery is long. "It's hard to stay clean when you're surrounded by so much despair," he admits, "but I'm trying." For women in Phoenix, homelessness comes with unique risks. Assault, exploitation, and trafficking are constant threats. Jessica, a 22-year-old who fled an abusive relationship, describes the fear that governs her every move. "I don't sleep at night," she says. "That's when it's most dangerous." Jessica has found temporary refuge at a women's shelter, but she knows it's not a permanent solution. "I need stability," she says, "not just for me, but for my future." Number 7, Oakland. Once a bustling port city and a cradle of progressive movements, Oakland embodied resilience, innovation, and cultural vibrancy. It was a city where jazz clubs played through the night, where Black Panther rallies fought for justice, and where families thrived in close-knit communities. Today, this promise feels shattered. Homeless encampments line streets, their inhabitants reflecting the harsh realities of a city fractured by inequality. Oakland's housing market has become a battleground where longtime residents are pitted against the forces of gentrification. Once affordable neighborhoods have been transformed into luxury enclaves, and families that lived here for generations are being displaced. Median home prices now exceed $800,000, and rent for a one-bedroom apartment averages $2,400 per month, prices that force working-class families out. Laura had lived in the same two-bedroom apartment for 30 years. Her children grew up here, and her husband painted murals on the walls that now crumble from neglect. But when their landlord sold the building to a developer, their rent doubled. "We fought back," Laura says, her voice shaking with both defiance and exhaustion. "We went to city council meetings, protested, begged for mercy, still they were evicted." Laura and her family now live in an RV parked on a desolate street, surrounded by others who share their fate. "Every time I hear a knock on the door," she says, "I wonder if it's the city telling us to leave again." The Wood Street encampment has become a symbol of Oakland's homelessness crisis. It spans blocks, housing hundreds of unhoused residents in tents, RVs, and makeshift shelters. Within this sprawling community are stories of tragedy, resilience, and surprising solidarity. Anthony, a former truck driver, has taken on a leadership role at Wood Street. "This is not just a place to sleep," he says. "This is a family." Anthony coordinates cleanups, distributes food donations, and helps newcomers find space. His own journey to homelessness began after a workplace injury left him unable to work. "I never thought I'd end up here," he says, "but now this is home." For women, homelessness in Oakland brings unique and terrifying challenges. Many are survivors of domestic violence, fleeing unsafe homes only to face new dangers on the streets. Lila, a 27-year-old mother, escaped her abusive partner but now struggles to protect her 4-year-old daughter in the encampment. "I don't sleep at night," she says. "I can't. I have to watch over her." Oakland is a city of stark contrasts. In neighborhoods like Rockridge, million-dollar homes sit behind manicured lawns, while just a few miles away, tents line the streets. This disparity is not just visual, it is visceral, a living testament to the failure of policies meant to protect the vulnerable. Moving on to Silicon Valley. San Jose is the capital of innovation. Its skyline, dotted with gleaming corporate offices, tells the story of a city at the forefront of global technological progress. However, beneath this veneer of prosperity lies a stark reality. San Jose also stands as a cautionary tale about unchecked inequality. Here, the gap between the haves and the have-nots is not a crack. It's a chasm, a societal rift so wide that thousands of people have fallen through it. In San Jose, the median home price of $1.3 million is not just a statistic, it's a barrier, a fortress that locks out everyone except the wealthiest. Rent, averaging $3,000 a month, drains the lifeblood of working-class families, forcing many to choose between shelter and sustenance. Essential workers, those who keep the city running, are being driven out or onto the streets. Alyssa is a single mother of two. She used to work as a chef at a tech campus cafeteria, preparing gourmet meals for employees earning six-figure salaries. But when her rent increased by 40%, Alyssa couldn't keep up. "I'd never missed a rent payment in my life," she says, tears streaming down her face. "But one month I had to choose between feeding my kids and paying the rent." Now, Alyssa and her children live in their car. Her children think it's a game, they call it car camping. Alyssa doesn't have the heart to tell them otherwise. San Jose was once a city where middle-class families thrived. Teachers, firefighters, and nurses lived comfortably, their wages keeping pace with the cost of living. That reality has eroded. Teachers commute from as far as Stockton and Modesto, spending hours in traffic to reach classrooms filled with students who face the same housing insecurities as their instructors. While tech executives enjoy luxury high-rises, the invisible workers who clean their offices, serve their meals, and maintain their servers are pushed further into poverty. Many live in RVs parked on city streets, forming a new kind of community. For these workers, the term Silicon Valley dream feels like a cruel joke. Stretching across the city, Guadalupe River Park is home to one of San Jose's largest homeless encampments. Tents, tarps, and makeshift shelters line the riverbank, forming a community bound not by choice but by necessity. Meet Diego, a 27-year-old who once worked as a software engineer. "I had a good job, benefits, everything," he says. Then my mother got sick and the medical bills wiped me out. Diego lost his home, his job, and eventually his hope. This is my Silicon Valley story, he says, gesturing to the tattered tent he now calls home. For women like Rosa, a 19-year-old fleeing domestic violence, the streets of San Jose offer no refuge. I thought leaving him would make me safe, Rosa says, but out here I feel like I'm in danger every second of the day. Rosa stays awake at night, clutching a small can of pepper spray, her only line of defense. San Jose has implemented several programs aimed at addressing homelessness, including tiny home villages and motel voucher programs, but critics argue that these efforts barely scratch the surface. The city needs an estimated 30,000 additional affordable housing units to meet current demand. Without systemic change, San Jose risks becoming a city where only the ultra-rich can survive. Up next, Denver. Denver's homelessness crisis has evolved in tandem with its rapid urban growth. Known for its stunning Rocky Mountain views and vibrant cultural scene, Denver has become a magnet for newcomers seeking opportunity. But this influx has driven up housing costs, creating a landscape where thousands are left behind. Denver's median home price now exceeds $570,000, and rents average $2,100 per month. For low-income families, these prices are insurmountable. Entire neighborhoods have transformed, with luxury condos replacing affordable housing. In an attempt to address the crisis, Denver introduced safe outdoor spaces, designated areas where unhoused individuals can set up tents with access to basic amenities. These spaces offer a semblance of safety and stability, but they are not a permanent solution. Martha, 53, moved to Denver 20 years ago to escape an abusive marriage. She found work as a caregiver and built a modest life. But when her landlord sold her apartment building, Martha couldn't find another affordable place. I never thought this could happen to me, she says, sitting in a safe outdoor space. But here I am. Denver's homelessness crisis is deeply intertwined with mental health and substance abuse issues. Kyle, a 32-year-old veteran, struggles with PTSD and addiction. I fought for this country, he says, his voice trembling. But now I'm fighting just to survive. Denver's shelters often turn away individuals with complex health needs, leaving people like Kyle to fend for themselves. This lack of support perpetuates a cycle of homelessness that feels impossible to escape. Women experiencing homelessness in Denver face a unique set of challenges. For many, the streets are a place of constant fear. Sheila, a 41-year-old mother, recounts the nights she spent awake, guarding her children while they slept in their car. I had to be their protector, she says, but who was protecting me? Advocates argue that Denver needs a comprehensive approach to tackle homelessness, one that includes affordable housing, mental health services, and job training programs. Without these measures, the city risks deepening its crisis. Number 4. San Diego. San Diego, often lauded for its sunny beaches, vibrant nightlife, and tourist attractions like the San Diego Zoo, hides a grim reality beneath its idyllic surface. This city, known as America's finest, is also a stark emblem of the housing crisis gripping the nation. With over 10,264 people experiencing homelessness, the beaches that tourists flock to are often shared with those seeking refuge. San Diego's housing market is one of the most expensive in the country. The median home price exceeds $900,000, and the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment surpasses $2,500 per month. These numbers are not just staggering, they're paralyzing for the city's working-class residents. Essential workers, including teachers, nurses, and public service employees, are being priced out of the very communities they serve. Carla was once a homeowner in San Diego, living a comfortable suburban life with her husband and 2 children. But when her husband fell ill and medical bills piled up, their savings evaporated. We sold the house to pay for his treatments, Carla explains. I thought we'd bounce back, but the cost of living here is relentless. Now, Carla and her teenage sons live in an RV parked near Balboa Park. I used to come here with my kids for picnics, she says, holding back tears. Now this park is our backyard. San Diego's response to homelessness often involves sweeps where encampments are dismantled and residents are forced to relocate. Critics argue that these measures are performative, aimed more at appeasing tourists and affluent residents than addressing the root causes of homelessness. For women like Grace, a 28-year-old fleeing domestic violence, the streets of San Diego are a daily battle for safety. The shelters are always full, Grace says. I sleep with one eye open, clutching my backpack because it has everything I own. Grace's story is not unique. Single mothers and families often find themselves living in cars, with no stable place to call home. While San Diego has invested in affordable housing initiatives and shelter expansions, experts agree that the city needs a minimum of 15,000 affordable units to make a dent in the crisis. Without systemic change, the juxtaposition of million-dollar homes and sprawling homeless encampments will only grow starker. Counting down to Seattle. Seattle, the Emerald City, is a beacon of innovation and opportunity, home to some of the world's most successful tech giants like Amazon and Microsoft. It boasts glittering skyscrapers and the allure of financial prosperity. But as the city thrives, a darker narrative unfolds beneath its booming economy. With 14,044 people experiencing homelessness, Seattle finds itself grappling with a crisis that mirrors the growing economic divide in America. The housing market in Seattle has become a playground for the wealthy. The average rent bedroom apartment is $2,600 per month, while the median home price has skyrocketed to $875,000. These astronomical figures force even middle-class families into precarious financial situations. For those earning minimum wage or living paycheck to paycheck, the idea of stable housing is little more than a distant dream. Take James, a 45-year-old veteran who served in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Returning home, he faced the invisible wounds of post-traumatic stress disorder. I thought the system would help me, but every door seemed to close as soon as I knocked, James recounts. After exhausting his savings on medical bills and temporary accommodations, he found himself living in a tent under Interstate 5. The nights are the hardest, he says. The sound of the cars above reminds me of the helicopters back in the desert. James's story is a stark reminder that many experiencing homelessness in Seattle are not without skills, ambition, or history. They're victims of a system ill-equipped to handle the complexities of mental health and reintegration. For women in Seattle, the streets are a dangerous and unforgiving place. Tasha, a single mother of a 6-year-old daughter, fled an abusive relationship only to find herself navigating the city's overcrowded shelters. Every shelter I called said they were full, she explains. With no family to turn to, Tasha spent weeks living in her car before securing a spot in a temporary housing facility. My daughter asked me why we couldn't go home. How do you explain to a child that home doesn't exist anymore? Seattle's response to homelessness has often been criticized for its short-sightedness. The city's encampment sweeps, aimed at clearing public spaces, displace individuals without providing long-term solutions. These measures, though intended to restore public order, often exacerbate the problem by uprooting the fragile networks many homeless individuals rely on. While the crisis looms large, Seattle has taken steps toward addressing it. Initiatives like the Seattle Housing Levy, aimed at funding affordable housing projects, have shown promise. Additionally, nonprofits like Mary's Place provide safe havens for women and families. Yet the gap between need and resources remains vast, requiring sustained effort and innovation. All right, let's look into the City of Angels. Los Angeles, home to Hollywood's glitz and glamour, is also home to 71,320 unhoused individuals, making it the city with the second largest homeless population in the United States. Nowhere is this more visible than on Skid Row, a 50-block area in downtown LA that has become the epicenter of America's homelessness crisis. Here, tents stretch as far as the eye can see, and the air is thick with the scent of despair. The average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Los Angeles is $2,800 per month, while the median home price is $900,000. These staggering figures have turned housing into a luxury commodity. For many Angelenos, even full-time employment fails to provide the security of a roof over their heads. The working poor janitors, retail workers, teachers are being pushed further and further to the margins. Karen, a 38-year-old mother of two, sought refuge on Skid Row after fleeing an abusive partner. "I thought the shelters would be safe," she says, her voice trembling, "but even there you have to watch your back." Karen spends her nights clutching her children, praying they'll wake up to a better future. "I used to dream about sending my kids to college. Now I just pray they'll survive another day." Safety is a constant concern for LA's homeless population. Violent crime rates on Skid Row are significantly higher than in other parts of the city. Many unhoused individuals, particularly women, face harassment, assault, and exploitation. Marcus, a 29-year-old man living in a makeshift shelter downtown, shares his harrowing experience. "I've been mugged 3 times this year." When you have nothing, even your dignity feels like it's under attack. Despite investing billions of dollars in initiatives like Measure H, a sales tax increase to fund homelessness programs, Los Angeles faces a shortfall of over 500,000 affordable housing units. The city's shelter system is also overwhelmed, leaving thousands to fend for themselves on the streets. Los Angeles has the resources and visibility to lead the fight against homelessness, but systemic reform is essential. Expanding affordable housing, increasing mental health services, and addressing the root causes of poverty are critical steps toward a more equitable future. Off to the Big Apple. New York City holds the unfortunate title of having the largest homeless population in the United States, with over 88,000 individuals lacking permanent housing. This includes thousands of families and children, many of whom rely on the city's overburdened shelter system. The average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in New York City is $4,000 per month, while the median home price exceeds $1 million. For the working poor, these prices are not just high, they're unattainable. Even middle-income families find themselves on the brink of financial ruin. Martha, a 31-year-old mother of 3, spends her nights in a crowded shelter in the Bronx. "I used to work 2 jobs, but it wasn't enough," Martha says. After her landlord raised the rent by $500, she had no choice but to move out. "Now my kids ask me why we can't go home. I don't have an answer." With a recent influx of 100,000 migrants, New York City's shelter system is stretched to its breaking point. Many shelters are operating at capacity, leaving thousands to sleep in subway stations, parks, or makeshift camps. The lack of adequate resources has sparked debates about the city's ability to handle its growing homeless population. For women, the streets of New York are a daily fight for survival. Angela, a 27-year-old who became homeless after losing her job, recounts the challenges of navigating the city's shelters. "It's hard to find a place where you feel safe. The shelters are overcrowded and the streets aren't any better." New York City has implemented measures like rent stabilization and affordable housing development, but the demand far outpaces supply. Experts argue that addressing homelessness requires a multifaceted approach, including mental health services, job training programs, and systemic reform. And now here we are standing at the edge of the story, but let's be clear, this is not an ending. It's an invitation. Because the people you've glimpsed today, those whose lives are stitched into the fabric of this narrative, don't have the luxury of endings. Their struggle continues night after night, beneath bridges, in crowded shelters, on street corners where hope flickers like a dying flame. As you sit there, perhaps in the comfort of your home, surrounded by warmth and familiarity, ask yourself this: what are we willing to do? Not tomorrow, not next year, but now. Because the question isn't, why hasn't anyone done something? The question is, why haven't we? Look around you, the solution's done.